Soldier reunion with best friend Bobcat. After 2 years, you won't believe what happens next. In the vast, sun-scorched wilderness of southern New Mexico, silence wasn't just common, it was sacred. The kind that stretched for miles across endless, rocky terrain, broken only by the faint whisper of wind brushing past dry grass and scattered boulders. This was where Staff Sergeant Nathan Cole had been stationed for the last 5 months, a lone figure, manning a remote border surveillance outpost 80 miles from the nearest town and even further from anything that resembled comfort. To most, it was punishment. To Nathan, after 2 tours in Afghanistan, it felt like breathing room. He was a man molded by war and hardened by duty. His days were shaped by strict routine, early morning system checks, long hours watching surveillance feeds, and quiet meals in the cramped prefab building that served as both home and command center. There was no real interaction, no distractions, just the occasional military drone overhead, or a visit from a border patrol truck dropping supplies. Even the sky above seemed to hang a little lower out here, the weight of the desert sun pressing down on every moment. Then came the day that changed everything. It started like all the others: dusty air, stale coffee, and static-laced radio checks. Nathan was halfway through reviewing sensor data when something pulled at his attention. A sound, faint, almost lost in the wind, a high-pitched cry, distant and strained. At first, he thought it was just the desert playing tricks, the kind of auditory hallucination that came from too many hours alone. But it came again. Curious, he stepped outside, the sun baking his skin through his uniform, and listened more closely. The sound was real. Grabbing a small emergency pack and his sidearm, standard protocol, Nathan followed the sound down a narrow, rocky trail just behind the outpost. The cries grew louder as he approached a shallow ravine cluttered with mesquite and jagged stone. And there, nestled against a cracked rock, was a tiny ball of fur. A bobcat cub, eyes barely open. Thin, shaking, ribs showing through its spotted coat. No sign of a mother, no tracks, just the fragile, trembling life in front of him. Nathan knelt, instinctively cautious. Wild animals, especially predators, were not to be handled. He knew the rulebook by heart. But as he looked into the kitten's glassy, struggling eyes, something inside him stirred. Not pity. Not even guilt, just understanding. A familiar kind of aloneness. The same hollow stare he'd seen too many times in war, on the faces of children orphaned by conflict. And suddenly, the desert didn't feel so empty anymore. "I guess you're stuck with me now," he muttered, pulling off his jacket to gently wrap the cub. Back at the outpost, Nathan fashioned a makeshift bed from a supply crate, an old towel, and a corner of his sleeping quarters. He didn't name the cub, not yet. That would make it too real. He told himself it was just until the wildlife center could be contacted. But days passed, then weeks. The calls didn't go through. The signal here was unreliable at best, and convoys only arrived every few weeks. By the time one did, it was already too late. The cub, who he eventually started calling Scout for the way it wandered around his boots, had become part of his life, feeding with a makeshift syringe, following him quietly during system checks, curled up near the warm hum of his computer at night. And Nathan, who hadn't spoken more than a few words a day before Scout came along, now found himself talking aloud to Scout about everything: war, family, regrets, dreams he no longer allowed himself to have. He told himself this wasn't permanent, that Scout would eventually go to a sanctuary, that the attachment wasn't real. But in the quietest moments, when the stars blinked across the desert sky and the night wrapped around the outpost like a heavy blanket, Nathan felt something shift in his chest. A small place cracked open, because for the first time in a long time he wasn't entirely alone. Scout had brought a strange kind of rhythm to Nathan's life. The cub was now stronger, eyes fully open, fur thicker and brighter, and its presence had become as natural as the wind that whistled through the cracks in the outpost walls. Still too small to be fierce, but no longer as fragile as before. Nathan watched him with quiet fascination, how the little bobcat learned to balance, to stalk insects near the fence, or how he'd let out short, gravelly yowls at night like he was calling for something he didn't yet understand. Nathan never let Scout get too close. He didn't pet him, didn't cradle him, didn't try to domesticate what he knew was never meant to stay. But despite the distance, a bond was forming, something deeper than words or rules. Some evenings, Nathan would sit near the doorway of the outpost, canteen in hand, while Scout would lounge a few feet away just beyond reach, blinking slowly in the orange hue of the setting sun. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was shared, but isolation has a way of twisting time, and in the 4th month of their companionship, reality came knocking. Nathan's satellite radio came to life, garbled static at first, then a clear voice. His commanding officer. Surveillance posts were being shuffled, duties reassigned. The military was pulling him back in. He'd be rotating out in 10 days. They were sending in his replacement. His first thought wasn't about the outpost or the transfer. It was about Scout. As the line went dead, Nathan stood frozen, staring out at the landscape, now washed in twilight. Scout sat on his usual perch atop a low stone ledge, his sharp eyes tracking a beetle across the dirt. He was wild, but not wild enough, dependent in small ways, not yet ready to hunt for himself, not yet hardened to the threats outside this wire perimeter. And if Nathan left, what would become of him? He tried calling wildlife authorities again, but the signal cut out. He even considered smuggling Scout out, but knew the rules. Transporting. A wild predator without authorization could get him court-martialed, and yet leaving Scout behind felt worse. That night, Nathan barely slept. He stared at the ceiling as Scout paced outside the window, his soft paw steps brushing against the concrete, like a metronome counting down. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A border patrol truck, early supply drop. The driver, a scruffy, good-natured guy named Alvarez, had been by before, but this time he brought someone else. A woman, mid-30s, sharp eyes, sun-leathered skin. She introduced herself as Rachel Nolan, a field vet with the state's Wildlife Rescue Division. Apparently, someone had finally forwarded Nathan's. "Hold messages. You said you found a cub? A bobcat?" she asked, her tone a blend of curiosity and quiet warning. Nathan nodded, unsure whether he was relieved or cornered. Rachel stepped out back, crouched near the spot where Scout often lingered. It didn't take long. The cub appeared, low and cautious, eyes locked on the stranger. Rachel didn't move. "Doesn't look tame," she murmured, more to herself. "That's good." Nathan explained everything. How he found Scout, what he fed him, how he avoided treating him like a pet. Rachel listened without interrupting, occasionally glancing toward the cub. "He's alive because of you," she finally said. "But it's time. He needs to learn how to be what he was born to be, and the longer he stays here, the harder that gets." Nathan looked at Scout, who was now watching them from a shaded patch near the fence. There was no fear in his stance, just quiet awareness, maybe even trust. And in that moment, Nathan realized something painful. Scout didn't just need freedom, he deserved it. "I can come back with a team tomorrow," Rachel offered. "We'll do it safely." Nathan nodded. "Okay." But when she and Alvarez drove away, the weight of that word settled like stone in his gut. That night, Nathan cooked one of his ration meals, split some of the contents, and left it near Scout's favorite spot. Then he sat outside in the growing dark, the desert air crisp and thin. Scout came as usual and sat across from him. For a long time, neither of them moved. Nathan took a slow breath and whispered almost to himself, "You're gonna be okay, little guy." And for the first time, Scout let out a low chuff, a short, breathy sound Nathan had never heard from him before. It wasn't a cry, it wasn't a warning. It was something else entirely. Recognition. Something in Nathan's chest cracked open. The countdown had begun. The next morning arrived with a pale sky and cold wind sweeping across the observation post. Nathan stood at the doorway long before sunrise, eyes fixed on the horizon. In his chest, the heaviness hadn't lifted. He kept wondering how Scout would react when the moment came, when strangers came to take him away from the only place he'd ever known. Part of him still questioned whether this was right, but another part, the part that had grown to know Scout's every movement and habit, knew this was the only choice left. By mid-morning, a dust trail appeared in the distance. Rachel was back, as promised, this time in a larger vehicle with 2 additional staffers and a large animal transport carrier secured in the back. They approached quietly, with professional calm, and began setting up their equipment in the outpost's shaded corner just beyond where Scout usually came to rest. Rachel glanced toward the rocks. "He around?" she asked. "He knows something's different," Nathan replied. "He's been distant since yesterday." "Smart animal," she muttered, already prepping a tranquilizer dart just in case. "We'll try to avoid using this, but if he panics, we can't risk him injuring himself." Nathan winced at the thought. Every part of him hated what was about to happen, but he stayed silent, watching. For nearly an hour, they waited. Nathan sat motionless on a low crate, eyes scanning the open terrain. The others kept back, minimizing movement. And then, as if summoned by routine or instinct, Scout appeared. He moved slowly, cautiously, eyes locked on Nathan first, then flicking. Toward the strangers, Rachel froze. "That's him?" Nathan nodded. "Yeah." Scout's ears twitched, his body tensed, but he didn't run. Instead, he moved closer, not to the crate of food they'd placed earlier, but toward Nathan. Stopping just a few feet away, he sat down, alert, calm, watching. Nathan didn't speak, didn't move, but something unspoken passed between them. Then, it happened. Rachel gave a quiet signal, and one of the handlers edged forward. The second handler circled slowly behind. Scout immediately sensed the shift. His head darted left, tail flicking low and fast. He took a step back. "Wait," Nathan said, standing up. The handlers paused. Nathan slowly stepped toward Scout. The Bobcat backed away slightly, but didn't run. Nathan crouched, lowering his voice. "It's okay, buddy. They're going to take care of you now." "It's time." Scout's eyes narrowed. His muscles coiled, ready to flee, but Nathan made the chuffing sound again, that low, breathy exhale that had once bonded them in silence. Scout blinked once, then twice. His body eased. Not relaxed, not entirely, but accepting. Rachel moved, in quickly, expertly, looping a net around the space near Scout and guiding him gently toward the crate. He resisted for a moment, claws scratching at the ground but never fully panicked. With Rachel guiding and Nathan speaking softly, Scout entered the carrier. The door clicked shut. It was over. The moment the carrier was secure, the air seemed to shift. Nathan stood frozen, staring at the crate. His hand hovered near the mesh door, but he didn't touch it. Rachel approached, breath slow, voice steady. "That went smoother than I expected." Nathan nodded, but his throat was too tight to speak. Scout let out a low growl, not angry, not afraid, just unsettled. The team loaded the carrier into the vehicle. Nathan followed, steps mechanical, as if his body moved on its own while his heart stayed behind. Rachel paused at the door before getting in. Once he settled at the sanctuary, "I'll send you updates," she said. "You gave him a better chance than most." Nathan gave a tight smile, eyes still on the carrier. "Just make sure he's got space and quiet. He'll have both." The truck pulled away, tires crunching across the gravel, growing smaller in the distance. Nathan stood there long after it vanished, the silence around him suddenly too loud. He returned inside, the outpost colder than it had ever felt before. That night he couldn't bring himself to eat. He stared at the empty corner where Scout used to rest, where his food bowl once sat, now spotless and still. A strange hollowness settled in his chest, something deeper than sadness. Like losing a piece of himself. He'd seen men leave before, friends, brothers. But this was different. This was the quiet grief of choosing to let go before life made the choice for you. And the strangest thing? Nathan didn't regret it. He stayed up that night writing a letter he never planned to send. It was to Scout. Words he couldn't say, out loud. Memories he didn't want to lose. He folded it carefully and tucked it into the back of his journal. Maybe one day someone would find it. Maybe they'd understand. The next morning, Nathan received the official transfer order. He'd be leaving the post in 3 days. No time to linger, no time to wallow. He packed slowly, deliberately, taking one last look at the outpost that had become his home. But there was one thing he didn't pack: the blanket Scout used to sleep on. That he folded and placed gently on the ledge near the back fence. Just in case 2 years passed like a slow-burning memory, always present, never quite fading. Nathan's world shifted entirely after leaving the outpost. He was reassigned to a stateside training unit, mentoring new recruits and teaching surveillance techniques to fresh faces who hadn't yet seen war or silence. The desert dust still clung to his boots in memory, but the world around him had grown louder, busier, less personal. On the surface, Nathan had adjusted well. His reports were clean. His students respected him. He even joined a local community fitness program and made casual acquaintances who didn't ask too many questions. But something deep inside him remained, untouched, suspended. That final look Scout gave him before the carrier door closed played in his mind more often than he admitted. There had been something in those amber eyes, something that looked too much like understanding. Rachel had kept her word, sending an update a few weeks after the transfer. Scout had made it safely to the sanctuary. He was healthy, adapting, even thriving in a large enclosure built to mimic his natural habitat. "He's cautious around humans," she'd written, "but confident. He's still very much wild." Nathan had read that message 3 times, then closed his inbox without replying. There was nothing to say, not then. But time doesn't just heal, it transforms. And nearly 24 months after Scout was taken away, something unexpected arrived in Nathan's inbox, a name he hadn't seen since Rachel Morgan. The subject line was short: "Update and invitation." Nathan clicked it with a pulse of curiosity and anxiety mingling in his chest. Inside was a message that stopped him cold. "Scout is doing well. We've observed some extraordinary behavior lately that made me think of you." He responds to the same chuffing sound you once described, especially during certain enrichment times. "We're filming a segment for a wildlife conservation documentary next month. I thought, if you'd like, maybe you'd want to visit. It might be meaningful for both of you." He sat back staring at the screen. His heart was pounding in a way he hadn't felt since his first solo patrol years ago. The thought of seeing Scout again filled him with emotions too tangled to name: hope, fear, guilt, wonder. Would Scout even recognize him? Had too much time passed? It took him a full day to gather the courage to respond. "Yes, I'd like to." "Come," he wrote. Simple, honest. The words looked small compared to what he felt. The next weeks crawled. Nathan cleared his schedule, got a few days of leave, packed carefully. Not much, just the essentials. But there was one thing he didn't leave behind. Folded in the bottom of his bag was the same flannel cloth Scout used to sleep on. It still carried a faint scent of the desert sun. When the day finally arrived, Nathan drove toward the sanctuary in a quiet daze. The landscape outside shifted, slowly from urban sprawl to rolling terrain, then finally to the dry rocky brush that looked all too familiar. The sanctuary wasn't far from the same territory where he'd found Scout all those months ago. That felt right, like it had come full circle. The facility was larger than he expected, spread across dozens of acres of desert wilderness. Rachel met him near the main entrance. She hadn't changed much, same calm presence, same no-nonsense tone, but her eyes softened when she saw him. "Thanks for coming," she said. "He's in good shape, strong, territorial." "Sounds about right." Nathan smiled, but his hands were shaking. Rachel briefed him on what to expect. "We're going to bring you near the viewing platform overlooking his enclosure. It's his choice whether he approaches. No pressure, no contact, just presence." Nathan nodded, throat dry. "Understood." They walked together along a winding gravel path, the sun already high overhead. When they reached the viewing area, Rachel gestured toward the large enclosure. "He usually suns himself on that rock mid-morning." Nathan stepped to the edge and looked out. The habitat was impressive, massive, with rocks and shaded coves, trees and tall brush. And then there he was, resting lazily across a sun-warmed slab of stone. Scout, larger now, muscular, wild, but unmistakably him. Nathan's breath caught. His hand clenched the old flannel in his pocket. Every cell in his body screamed that it was Scout. That was his boy. Scout's ears flicked. He turned slightly toward the platform. His gaze didn't shift immediately, but his body tensed, aware. Alert. Then, slowly, his head turned fully, and his eyes landed on Nathan. A heartbeat passed. 2. Then Nathan did something he hadn't done in years. He made the sound, the soft, low chuff, the same one they used to share in the silence of dusk at the outpost. Scout froze. Then something astonishing happened. He stood, deliberate, controlled, and walked, straight toward the edge of the enclosure, toward the viewing platform. His gait was slow, powerful, but without fear, without threat. Rachel didn't speak. No one did. Scout stopped just 15 feet away, sat, watched. Nathan swallowed hard, the air thick in his throat. He made the chuffing sound again, barely audible. And then, Scout answered, a low, breathy exhale, recognition. Not just curiosity, not instinct, something real. Nathan could feel it. Whatever they had built all those months in the desert, it hadn't vanished, it had waited, slept, but it was still there. Rachel finally spoke, her voice soft. That's the closest he's come to a visitor in months. He's never chuffed at anyone else. Nathan smiled, but his eyes burned. This wasn't just a reunion. It was proof that some bonds aren't broken by time or distance or silence. They're etched in something deeper. And as Scout remained there, watchful, calm, remembering, Nathan knew this was more than just closure. It was healing. The sun slipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the enclosure as Scout remained near the viewing platform, his eyes fixed on Nathan with a calm intensity that spoke volumes without a sound. The world around them faded. Rachel's quiet breathing, the muted conversation of the documentary crew, even the click of camera shutters, all melted into background noise. For Nathan, it felt like time had folded in on itself. Like those two, years apart, were no longer a gap, but a narrow river now bridged by this simple, wordless moment. He didn't know how long he stood there, completely still, not wanting to break whatever invisible thread held Scout near. This wasn't a display of domestication. It wasn't a pet recognizing its owner. This was something older, something rooted in survival, in shared silence and mutual respect. Wild to wild, heart to heart. Rachel finally stepped forward with quiet steps, her voice low. He stayed longer than I've ever seen. Usually he doesn't linger like this, not even for us. Whatever this is, it's rare. Nathan nodded, eyes still locked on Scout's. I never raised him to be tame, just helped him survive long enough to remember how to be wild. Rachel's gaze softened. And he never forgot the hand that helped him when he was too weak to help himself. They watched together until Scout finally rose, stretching his lean body in the last golden light. He gave one last chuff, turned slowly, and padded away, back, toward the tall rocks and the cooling shadows of his domain. There was no sadness in the way he left, no hesitation, just the quiet confidence of an animal at peace with where he was, and that was enough for Nathan. He didn't need Scout to run to him or linger forever. The fact that Scout had come at all, had seen him, recognized him, acknowledged him in his own wild way, was more than he ever expected. It filled something in him that had been empty for far too long. Later, as the sanctuary staff packed up and the film crew quietly moved their equipment, Rachel handed Nathan a warm cup of coffee and motioned for him to follow her to a bench overlooking the broader reserve. They sat in silence for a while, the stars beginning to dot the sky overhead, crickets humming in the tall grass. Finally, she spoke. You know, I've seen a lot of animals come and go, injured ones, abandoned ones. Most recover, move on, adapt. But every now and then, there's one with a story that reaches beyond biology or behavior. Something deeper. Scout, he's one of those, and you're part of the reason he made it. Nathan stared out into the night, the last trace of light fading behind the horizon. I didn't think it would still mean this much, he said quietly. I thought maybe I'd come here and it'd be nothing, just closure, but it wasn't. It felt like the best part of who I was out there somehow survived because he did. Rachel nodded. We think we're the ones who save them, but sometimes they save us first. Nathan didn't respond. He didn't need to. That truth had already landed in his chest like a quiet weight, a comforting one. Before he left the sanctuary that evening, Rachel handed him a manila folder with a few photographs inside. Scout, lying in the sun. Scout, hunting in the enclosure. Scout perched on a rock at sunset. But there was one that stood out. Taken just an hour earlier, Scout near the viewing platform, his eyes gazing directly into the lens. Nathan stared at it for a long time. He didn't need 1,000 photos. This one held everything. Driving back toward town, the road stretched endlessly in the darkness. But this time, the emptiness of the landscape didn't feel lonely. It felt full, quiet and steady, like the bond he had once shared with a bobcat. That wasn't his pet, wasn't his project, but something far more personal. A mirror, maybe, a reminder that survival is not just about muscle or instinct. Sometimes it's about connection. Back at the base, life resumed its usual rhythm. Training sessions, briefings, paperwork. But Nathan felt different. Not louder, or happier, just more whole. When his fellow instructors asked how the trip went, he smiled and said, "It was good," and left it at that. Some stories didn't need explaining. They just needed to be carried. Quietly. Gratefully. Weeks later, Rachel sent a short email. No subject line, no long message, just 2 sentences. Scout is still using the same rock every afternoon. I think he's waiting to hear that sound again. Nathan smiled as he read it. He stepped outside, into the fading light, the warm air wrapping around him like memory, and made the sound, the low, soft chuff, into the open evening air. No one heard it but him. And maybe, somewhere out there, Scout. Because not all goodbyes are endings. Some are simply promises we make in silence and somehow keep.